You ever notice how the most dangerous person in a room is usually the one nobody looks at? Yeah, that was me out of stories about quiet people playing the long game hit home for you. Stick around. You don't want to miss how this unfolds. I'm Evan Carter. I'm in my mid 40s. I drive an old sedan that rattles when it idles. And I've worked at Redwood Systems longer than some executives' marriages that on paper, I'm a senior financial analyst. In reality, I'm the guy who fixes messes after powerful people pretend math doesn't apply to them that I don't complain. I don't posture. I wear neutral colors, keep my head down, and leave exactly when my work is done. That's how you survive in corporate America when you're useful but not shiny. For over 2 decades, I existed between spreadsheets and silence. People talked around me, not to me. I was background noise, and honestly, that was exactly how I wanted it, until one night changed everything. The annual Redwood System celebration was held late in the evening at a downtown hotel that smelled like money and regret. Mandatory attendance. Open bar. Fake smiles. Executives congratulating each other for surviving another year. They almost destroyed it. I stood near a cocktail table nursing a soda that had gone flat, watching the room like I always did, observing patterns. Who avoided who? Who drank too much? Who laughed too loudly? That's when I felt it. That subtle shift in the room's energy, the kind that happens right before someone gets humiliated for entertainment. Logan Pierce had arrived, the CEO's son, early 30s. Perfect hair, designer suit, the kind of guy who'd never had to wait for anything, especially consequences. He moved through the room surrounded by people who laughed half a second too early at his jokes. Predators don't hunt alone. They gather an audience. That MY mistake. I'd taken my coat off because the coat check was overflowing. Just a simple dark wool trench. Nothing fancy. Bought years ago because it was warm and durable that I liked it. Logan noticed it immediately. Well, damn, he said loudly, stopping in front of me. Is that vintage or desperate? The conversation around us started to die. People love drama when it's not theirs. I think my dad's assistant had that same coat back in the day. Logan continued. Guess some people don't really grow with the company. Huh? Laughter. Soft. Cruel that I stayed calm. It keeps me warm, I said evenly. That should have been the end of it, but bullies never stop when you don't bleed. Still shopping secondhand? He pressed. Redwood pays pretty well. Or does it? He leaned in closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it personal. You saving up for something better? He wanted embarrassment, an apology, a reaction. What he didn't know was that earlier that same morning, I'd finished reviewing a set of numbers that could dismantle his father's empire. And what he definitely didn't know was what I'd been quietly collecting for 22 years. I looked straight at him, didn't blink. I'm not saving for a coat, I said calmly. I'm saving to buy influence. For a split second, silence. Then laughter exploded. Logan slapped my shoulder like I was a harmless joke. That's adorable, he said. You accountants are hilarious. The crowd laughed with him, because laughing with power feels safer than thinking. Logan drifted away, already bored, but I noticed something else. The CFO nearby had gone very quiet. The CEO avoided eye contact, and someone in legal suddenly checked their phone. They didn't laugh that I put my coat back on and left the event early. Outside, luxury cars lined the curb like trophies. That I got into my old sedan, closed the door, and sat there gripping the steering wheel. Not angry. Focused, I opened the glove compartment and pulled out a second phone. Only one contact was saved. Marcus hailed a man Redwood Systems had forced out years ago that a co-founder they thought they'd buried. The next morning, the office felt wrong. Too quiet, too tense, like a building holding its breath. That I arrived early. Same routine as always, and settled into my desk in the far corner of the finance floor. People underestimated that spot. From there, I saw everything that I opened a folder on my computer labeled archive compliance. Inside was something else entirely. Years of reports. Patterns. Mistakes disguised as strategy. Redwood Systems wasn't just unstable, that IT was bleeding. And leadership had been hiding it. That's when the internal messages started lighting up. Finance panicking. PR scrambling. Legal asking questions nobody wanted answered, that a financial article had dropped overnight questioning Redwood's debt structure. Anonymous source. Accurate. Very accurate. And then the real trigger hit, a missed obligation point, one tiny failure buried in the fine print of the company charter. Something that quietly changed who held power.my phone buzzed. A reply from Marcus. We need to talk. Late that afternoon, I met him at a quiet cafe most executives wouldn't be caught dead in. Marcus looked older, sharper. Men who've been betrayed tend to age that way. I slid a folder across the table. He opened it. His hands trembled. They did this to themselves, I said. Marcus exhaled slowly. You've been planning this, he said. For a long time, I replied. He looked at me differently then. Not as background, as a threat. And that's where part one ends, because the people at Redwood still thought this was a rumor. A scared of the glitch. They had no idea the quiet man they'd ignored for decades had just taken his first visible step. The next morning, the city felt heavier. Gray clouds pressed down on downtown, reflecting the mood inside Redwood Systems. No sun today. Perfect that I walked into the office like any other day. Neutral coat, neutral expression, invisible. But today I wasn't invisible. Something had shifted overnight. An electric tension hummed under fluorescent lights. People whispered. Phones buzzed. Eyes darted. And everyone who mattered had no clue why I slid into my cubicle, the far corner of the finance floor, the one nobody ever looked at. 3 monitors, stacks of reports, and a half-dead plant that somehow survived 2 decades of neglect. This was my war room. I pulled up the first file, Project Overhaul. Every number, every memo, every misstep of the executive team was there, waiting. The CEO's reckless acquisitions. The CFO cooking books to hide failures. The COO moving funds through shadow accounts like a magician. Everything was documented. Everything was mine to control. First, I needed allies, not friends. Allies. People who understood logic, who remembered why Redwood Systems had been great before greed and vanity took over. Nicholas Green. A former engineer turned board member, sidelined for years. He had grit, patience, and a memory like a steel trap. I'd met him months ago, quietly feeding him hints in the stairwell between smoking breaks. He knew numbers told stories. He knew the truth when he saw it. Marcus Hale, my co-conspirator, already had voting rights from his old shares. He wanted revenge, and he had the means. Together, we could move the board without anyone suspecting the quiet man in the corner. The morning passed with the usual facade of work. Emails, reports, spreadsheet hell. I walked past the executive offices, nodding politely, nothing more. But inside, everything was ticking like a bomb.by late afternoon. The first tremors hit. A junior analyst from another floor came running to my desk, pale. Evan, the CFO, she's asking about the acquisition files. She wants them shredded before audit. Perfect. Panic makes people sloppy. Sloppy makes evidence movable. And evidence is power. I smiled. Let's make it disappear, I said quietly. She blinked. You're not shredding them? No, I said. Not yet. We wheeled the boxes down to the garage, out of sight. Covered them with a gym blanket in my car. Secure. Untouchable. Invisible. That evening, I returned to my apartment. A modest one-bedroom filled with old books, a folding desk, and my trench coat hanging like armor by the door. I poured coffee. Black. Bitter. Fuel for what comes next. Marcus called. Everything's set. Yes, I said. The board will move when the right domino falls. He hesitated. Evan, are you sure about this? I looked around my small apartment. 22 years of patient work. Years of silent observation, unnoticed, underestimated. A lifetime of being invisible. I'm sure, I said. And this time they'll see me. The next day was a test that I walked the halls past terrified executives, some trying to look busy, others glued to their screens. Internal chatter showed panic over the overnight news article, a deep investigative piece highlighting financial mismanagement at Redwood Systems. The stock was already wobbling. I'd fed the journalists the raw data anonymously. Accurate, verifiable, undeniable. Executives didn't know it was me. They thought it was external. But they were panicking, just the way I wanted. By Wednesday, chaos reached a fever pitch. Marcus and I met in a quiet corner of the cafe we dubbed our strategy room. We pored over the voting schedule, mapped out who would move, when, and how. Nicholas Green would call the board meeting. The proxies were in place. No one suspected me. Yet, this is it, Marcus said. The moment everything changes. Yes, I replied. Timing is everything. If we strike too soon, they'll resist. Too late, and we lose the momentum. He looked at me, eyes sharp. You really aren't afraid? I paused. Thought of Logan Pierce, the CEO's spoiled son, mocking my coat. Thought of every condescending glance over 2 decades. Fear isn't part of the plan, I said. Patience is. Back at the office, I noticed subtle shifts. Logan was no longer the same. Gone was the arrogant swagger. He hovered in hallways, unsure, small. Word on the corporate grapevine was his father's empire was trembling. I smiled quietly. Even better. The predator was confused. By Friday, the first public tremor hit. The stock opened lower, triggering whispers, panic, and calls to the CFO. Internal memos leaked. People questioned the CEO's judgment openly in meetings that I watched it all unfold from my cubicle. Notes, observations, movements, everything was on schedule. Everything except for one variable. Logan. He wandered into my corner, hesitant. I looked up from my screen. He looked smaller, unsteady. Evan, he said, I need work. I can help. I studied him. The same man who mocked me weeks ago, now reduced to asking, vulnerable. Why first instinct? To reject, to let pride and revenge take the lead. But I didn't. Because this wasn't about him. It was about the company, the people who actually made it run. And the lesson had to be real. I offered him a position. Junior analyst. Entry level. $43,000. Reporting to Timothy Brooks, the new director. Invisible work. Essential work. Humble work. He blinked, stunned. The arrogance gone. Replaced by a flicker of humility. Start Monday, I said. 8 o'clock. Sharp. And I added, in this office, we don't comment on coats. You never know who's wearing them. He nodded. I could see the lesson sinking in. That night, I returned to my apartment, trench coat draped over the chair. 8 years old. $15. Still missing the same button. IT wasn't just a coat anymore. It was armor. History. Patience. The quiet storm had begun, and they had no idea it was coming. The boardroom at Redwood Systems was like a war zone dressed in suits. Polished wood. Expensive leather chairs. Glass walls reflecting anxiety. Inside, the air was thick. Tension, fear, and greed all mixed together. Executives shuffled papers, tapped screens, whispered in corners. No one knew what was coming, but everyone felt it. And the man they never noticed? He was already in the middle of it. I walked in quietly. Neutral trench coat. Calm eyes. Evan Carter, the Invisible Man, officially visible for the first time. Nicholas Green was already seated at the head of the table. He gave me a subtle nod. The silent signal. It's time that I slid into the far end chair, the one everyone ignored. Logan Pierce was there, nervous. His usual entourage nowhere in sight. He hadn't learned yet that being powerful doesn't mean being safe. All right, Nicholas began, voice steady as stone. We're here to discuss leadership and strategic direction. The CEO, Victor Pierce, Logan's father, leaned back in his chair, arrogance dripping from every pore. Let's keep this brief. I've got other meetings. I smiled inwardly. Brief, indeed. The first piece of the plan moved without fanfare that I placed a folder in front of Nicholas. The one Marcus Hale and I had prepared. Every document meticulously compiled. Financial mismanagement, offshore accounts, shady acquisitions, falsified revenue reports. All verified, all undeniable. Nicholas opened the folder. His eyes flicked to me. Then he cleared his throat. I'm calling a vote, he said. The board needs to decide. Is Victor Pierce fit to continue as CEO? The room froze. Executives glanced at each other, confused. Some smirked. Some panicked. Victor's eyes widened. Excuse me? Victor barked. This is preposterous. On what grounds? Nicholas tapped a sheet of paper. Financial malfeasance. Breach of fiduciary duty. Mismanagement of company resources. Whispers erupted. People started opening their laptops, checking numbers. Emails pinged. Phones vibrated. Chaos, but methodical chaos that I stayed quiet, letting them stew in it. The quiet man never rushes. He waits. Victor lunged forward, red-faced. You can't. This is illegal. You can't remove a CEO without my approval. Yes, we can, Nicholas said evenly, especially when the evidence is right in front of you. I leaned forward. For the first time, the room felt my presence. My voice was calm, controlled, cutting like a scalpel. Victor, I said, these documents are verifiable. Every number, every transaction, every misstep recorded. You've built an empire on illusion. Today it ends. Victor froze. Logan flinched. The rest of the board glanced at me, realization dawning. The quiet man in the corner held the power. Then came the twist. Marcus Hale had strategically positioned proxies. Shares that had been dormant, worthless, suddenly carried voting power. The board counted votes. Hands went up, one by one. Unanimously, Victor's mouth opened. No sound came out. Nicholas's gavel came down like a hammer of justice. Victor Pierce is hereby relieved of all executive duties, he announced. Effective immediately. Silence. Then murmurs. Then shocked. Victor's face turned white. Panic replaced arrogance. He looked around for someone to blame. Logan's eyes met mine. Fear. Regret. Humility creeping in where arrogance had lived, that he finally whispered, You orchestrated this? Yes, I said simply. No theatrics. No chows. Just patience and strategy. The room was spinning. Lawyers whispered legalese. VPs fumbled with tablets. CFOs calculated potential stock implications. But the damage was done. The first domino had fallen. After the meeting, I walked past Victor's stunned boardroom, past panicked executives, and into my cubicle that I opened my laptop. Stock prices were already fluctuating. Shares were being recalculated. Redwood Systems was breathing, but barely. The employees I'd quietly observed for decades were beginning to notice subtle changes. No one knew I had orchestrated it. No one except Marcus, Nicholas, and me. Logan approached later, timid. Evan, I didn't understand. You mocked the code, I said, voice calm. You mocked someone who had vision, who planned, who waited. He swallowed, nodding. You'll have a chance to learn, I said. Start Monday. Entry level. Learn what responsibility means. He left, smaller than he had arrived. Better to be by the end of the day, the office felt different. Employees whispered cautiously. Executives glanced nervously at each other. The stock was steadying, and the man they ignored for decades was no longer invisible. Patience, observation, strategy, execution. The quiet storm had struck. The first wave of change was over. But this was only the beginning. The days after Victor Pierce's removal were like walking through a minefield. Everyone at Redwood Systems could feel the change, but no one could see its full scope. The stock wavered nervously. Employees whispered in corners, and the remaining executives were on edge, unsure which way to look or who to trust. That I walked the floor quietly, trench coat draped over my shoulders like armor. 8 years old, $15, still missing the same button. I'd grown attached to that coat, not for fashion, but for what it represented: patience, preparation, and control. The first priority was stabilization, that I had to secure the company for the employees who actually built it, not the executives who siphoned its wealth. I started with transparency. All financial records, once buried in private folders, were now visible to department heads. Reports were accurate, clear, and understandable. No smoke, no mirrors. People needed to see that the company wasn't broken beyond repair. Only the leadership was. Marcus Hale helped coordinate the internal communications. Nicholas Green handled the board, keeping them informed, but carefully. And I stayed in the shadows, the architect behind every move, invisible in plain sight. Victor Pierce tried to make a spectacle. He reached out through his lawyers, threatening lawsuits. Whispers of criminal charges. He was desperate, flailing against the tide. He didn't understand that IT didn't matter. The law was on our side. His mismanagement had been documented, verified, undeniable. Meanwhile, Logan Pierce, the son, became a symbol of humility. I brought him into the junior analyst program. Entry level, coffee runs, filing, data entry. He hated it at first, but slowly he began to understand responsibility. By the end of the week, he was actually learning. The middle management layer that had existed solely to forward emails, gone. Executives who were dead weight, gone. The culture began to breathe. Employees started leaving at reasonable hours. Meetings were productive, not ceremonial. And the most important change? People started trusting again. Then came the first major test of the new order. A former VP attempted to leverage old connections, trying to sabotage a client deal. He underestimated the quiet man in the corner. I caught the memo before it left his inbox. I forwarded it to the board with my notes. Every attempt to manipulate, obstruct, or steal was met with immediate, calculated action. The lesson was simple. Redwood Systems no longer tolerated deception. The press, once skeptical, began to notice. Mysterious analyst turns company around. Read the headlines. Stories focused on transparency, fairness, and decisive leadership. Shares stabilized at $42. Confidence returned, not just externally. Internally, the employees believed again. Point one evening, alone in my office, I stared at the city skyline. The city was alive, indifferent to my small triumphs. I reached for my coat, tracing the frayed edge of the missing button. That I thought about Logan. The boy who mocked me, who thought arrogance could intimidate experience. Now he had a chance, a real chance, to learn and grow. That I thought about Victor. His empire crumbled, not in a day, but in the meticulous patience of someone he overlooked for decades. And I thought about me, the invisible man. No longer invisible. The reset button. 3 months later, Redwood Systems had transformed completely. Stock stabilized, growth steady. Deadweight executives replaced with talent that actually contributed. Middle management streamlined. Employee morale an all-time high. Logan Pierce, the former Prince, thriving as a competent, humble junior analyst that I sat in the CEO's office, a space now stripped of pretentiousness. No mahogany bars, no putting greens, just a desk, a whiteboard covered in strategy, and my trench coat in the corner. Catherine, my assistant, walked in. Everything's stable, Mr. Carter. The board, they respect you. People, they finally believe. I nodded. Good, I said. Let's keep it that way. She smiled. We never thought we'd see you like this. In charge. I shrugged. Sometimes being invisible is the best way to see everything. Logan knocked on the door and entered, looking nervous. Mr. Carter, thank you, he said quietly. I know I have a lot to learn. You do, I said. But if you're willing to listen, to work, to be patient, you'll be fine. He nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. The old arrogance was gone. In its place, humility, understanding, and maybe even potential that I put on my trench coat. Button it up to the chin. Walked past Catherine, past the busy floor, past people finally working together. The company was safe. The monster was gone. And the invisible man? He was finally seen.